Thanks for saying. I'm alive. We're going to call that a win. How are you doing, Excel? I'm alive. We're going to call that a win. How are you? Ah, there you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to choose your channel because mine is dead. Like dead. Yeah, they can't hear you. You're muted on OBS is what Ryan is saying. I can hear you, which means you're muted on OBS. Point. Oh, well, it wouldn't be a stream if we didn't have something
checking.
Sideways.
Yeah, so I should be fine on OBS now. I have to reload the other.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say now it's showing.
All right, can you guys hear me now? Can everybody in the chat hear me now? Press 1 if you can hear me now.
Excel having a boomer moment. I understand this all too well. Ryan knows what's going on.
It wasn't me. Like I was unmuted on OBS, but because I was switching through scenes, it kind of bugged out. So that's why I had to load up another scene real quick and load up a different one, and it fixed the issue. Which I know Ryan himself knows all too well.
Yeah.
But anyway, let me start over. Thanks everybody for coming out. I've just, like I said, this is my obligatory once every month stream. And the way this kind of came about is I've been following the people that did the Grieve and Study hoax papers. And I think probably most of the people in my chat know what that is. But about a couple years ago, Peter Boghossian, James Lindsay, and Helen Pluckrose, they were looking into all this critical social justice nonsense, and they were trying to figure out what was going on with it. And the first thing they tried to do is create these just ridiculous hoax papers and submit them to journals to see if they could get it published. And they quickly learned that there was actually a little bit more to it than just simply coming up with these ridiculous things that sound like they might fit the social justice narrative. So they actually got into digging into the actual academic work. And then they realized that, like, hey, as long as we write papers that come to the conclusions that these other academic works already set out to make, we can probably get them published. And boy, did they. Right? They got one of the best ones was...
Dog parks are rape culture.
Yeah. They did one on rape culture in dog parks, in that they think that if they start training men like dogs, then we could teach them not to rape.
Yeah, that was interestingly. And then they took Mein Kampf and they switched out all of the socialist words for feminist buzzwords, and it was printed as well.
Yeah. And so the question we look at this is like, why did this happen? Well, unfortunately, there's only a handful of academics that are actually trying to understand this, because that's where this is all coming from, right? This is all breeding in the academy. And then apparently at some point, probably in like 2015, the gates open and it's just flooded out to the rest of society and pop culture, right? Like we're seeing it. I'm seeing it at my workplace now. They're trying to get me to take, well, nothing's required, but in lieu of the recent shootings, they've set out resources on, racism and anti-racism, and they gave people the link to the implicit bias test. That even 2 of the 3 people that worked on that said, yeah, you can't use this to actually predict any kind of real behavior.
Yeah, it's
right. It doesn't mean anything. One of the telling things is that if you take the test twice, the chances are you're going to get radically different results the second time. It's probably nothing more than a novelty response. It doesn't really mean anything. So I'm sitting there like, I mean, I'm seeing this like infect my own workplace. And I'm looking back, and 2015, we made all these like social justice ownage videos, but it didn't do anything. It bounced right off of them because I don't think anybody really understood where this stuff was coming from. And even I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it because it's a lot. They've had 20 plus years in the academy to launder ideas amongst themselves. being completely bridged off from the rest of academia. I mean, Tim, I think
Well,
you
yeah,
can attest
because
to
okay,
that. It's heavy.
well, okay, when I was in college, I remember that if you were in the humanities, you didn't really associate with anybody outside of your field. So yeah, I can see what you're saying because I was in STEM. So um it was a very separate world when you were going to school. The only crossover you had were your mandatory courses. So I can see what you're saying. They're finally unleashed on the
Well,
on the world like
and
that.
so we even have problems where so these theories have become at least so dominant, and even though it's only a small percentage of academia, they hold a lot of power because they've instituted these, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which, those three words don't mean what the plain language sounds like it means.
Well,
They've
equity in the real world is just property that you own that you can sell. Okay.
yeah.
Like equity for these people is an entirely different thing. So right off the bat, some of their basic vernacular is totally different than the rest of the world.
Yeah, so they've instituted this at the administrative level, even in the university. And what we're seeing now is academic papers being pulled, not because um and this is in STEM or harder sciences, like psychology, for instance. And it's not because how you would traditionally get a paper removed, and usually it wouldn't even get removed. It would just be
Censored in some
debunked,
way.
right? Well,
Like,
no, it would be debunked because there was something wrong with it, right? Somebody came along and actually they were able to identify the issues with it, come up with their own objective standard in testing to prove that this was not the appropriate theory. Like, this is how Einstein comes and disproves Newton,
yes,
right? But that's
gotcha.
not what's happening. They're actually just getting pulled because the conclusions they come to don't conform with critical theory.
Okay, but so where are the rest of the like? Are they saying that the moneymaker that is STEM no longer has the like? I'm trying to figure out how they got to the point where this was an allowed practice when humanities doesn't make any freaking money in terms of collegiate intake.
Yeah, but it's so. I mean, I guess we got to start from the beginning here, right? Because
Yeah.
whenever people started making videos, even Jordan Peterson, when he came out, he would always blame postmodernism. A lot of us we remember cultural Marxism, how we use that pejorative to describe what these crazy intersectionalists were doing.
Yes.
Uh, in a lot of ways, that's accurate because they borrow a lot from what the critical theory of the 30s and 40s. They were basically disillusioned German Marxists that they were upset that Marxism didn't come to fruition. Right? They never saw their utopia, so they came up with the idea of critical theories, which was in countries like the United States, how would you get a revolution going? Well, everybody's like traditional theories aren't going to work because things were going pretty well here. So they came up with the idea of critical theories. And what people need to understand is it doesn't mean critical thinking, right? What critical theories actually do, and this is in their own words, is they decide to look at the current state of being and find things that are problematic. Right. So the entire idea is to problematize things that are going on in the existing uh, culture, and not necessarily they're not trying to explain anything. If it was explaining something, it would be a traditional theory. It is only to criticize and call something problematic.
So
Right.
critical is in your critiquing, not critical is in critical thinking and
E-
essential.
exactly.
Okay.
And one of the problems I think with just pointing to this school is that they weren't necessarily against the idea of traditional theories. They wanted to use it in tandem. I think I talked to you earlier. Like, Marxism was still a materialistic view, and they did have some belief in objective truth. Right? This was just another
Yes.
pathway that they invented to try to get people to go along with their revolutionary thinking.
Yeah. Okay. But okay, so what we're saying is that these people are the opposite of reductive, but they're pretending they're reductive.
Yeah, I mean, let me.
They're complicating simplicity. Is that what I'm hearing?
In some ways, like I said, a lot of this is heavy. That it does come from the Frankfurt School, and that they use the language, right, of critical in all of these new studies, right? You have critical race theory, critical feminist studies, critical gender studies. So they're all kind of pointing back to the same thing, but it's not exactly the same as the critical theorist of the past.
Okay.
Right? Because that's where we have to jump to. And I guess some of the biggest things they bothered is, first off, critical theory. It doesn't try to explain anything. It only tries to find problematics. Right?
Okay, so
that's the first
it's
thing that
literally
needs to
the
be understood.
ideology of bitching.
Basically, yes. Like it's if you wanted to simplify to that, it wouldn't necessarily be wrong, because the idea is to just look and be like, well, we're going to problematize this idea because it could potentially lead towards people being more racist in the future, right? So, and that's why you actually see the word, if you're ever listening to these lunatics, you're going to see them use, oh yes, this is problematic. I remember talking to somebody very distinctively when he was talking about how there's not that much difference between males and females. And then I said, that's bullshit. Like, biology and evolutionary psychology, like, there's just mountains of
Yeah.
work that is testable. And then their response is like, yeah, evolutionary psychology specifically has been very problematic.
No,
I mean,
it hasn't.
problematic is, it is if you understand their definition, where they're really just meaning it goes against theory. Critical theory specifically, but it goes
But it
against
doesn't
theory.
go against theory. It just goes against bitching.
Yeah, no, it goes.
We need to call this God of the Karens. This needs to be like Karendom. We need to call it Karianity, because this is literally just a way for them to bitch and nitpick. This is henpeckers unite.
I mean, yeah, but that's the only way they get people to do it, and a lot of the times there's like grains of truth in what they say, which I think we can talk about later, right? Like, you can look at things and say, like, yes, there's like this real disparity between, I mean, I guess Black America and White America when it comes to economic success. Unfortunately, the critical theory, they just have to point towards this is obviously racism, right? Like, any other hypothesis does not count. Traditional theories that explain these are inherently problematic because they don't deal with it. Because any fair system, according to them, you would just see equal outcomes.
But how do you get equal outcome with an unequal group? Like, how do they explain?
Once again, these theories don't explain anything. They only point to problems
that don't exist.
Well, I mean, sure. Like I said, there's always a grain of truth where nobody's going to argue that there's this disparity in outcomes on average. Like, I couldn't argue against it. Nobody could. But when it comes to explaining why, anything that, like, any traditional theory that looks at it closely and says, well, look, we can't really blame a lot of this on racism right now, they have to throw that out. Just whatever the word is, they have to throw it out just because it doesn't fit in with theory. They have to automatically call that wrong. And that any idea that doesn't lead to equal outcomes, right, that doesn't point to racism, anything like that is either like an idea that is protecting the status quo, which is protecting white supremacy, is what they would call it, and it's problematic. Like, it can just be thrown out on its face because it is not within the framework that they've created in order to achieve some sort of equitable society.
So how is this any different than a crappy Church of Nazarene promotion? I mean, like,
It's not.
Seriously.
It's not. And I've said there's there's a lot of religious overtones to this. And one thing I have to bring up that this actually came from the critical theorists of the past that is definitely borrowed is this idea of false consciousness. So this false consciousness, the way it manifests is, think of your Uncle Toms. The way they look at a person like Larry Elder that comes out and says, I don't think that racism is a major issue for black people in America. The way they look at that is, well, this person is suffering from some sort of false consciousness, right? They've been brainwashed by the system that has pushed upon them certain ideas, and they don't even realize how they're being oppressed, right? It's a very bourgeois way of looking at things, where people that aren't the perfect model representative of their group, they're suffering from some sort of false consciousness.
Okay. How do you determine what's a false consciousness?
It's pretty easy. If it doesn't fit within what theory says it should, then it's false consciousness. I mean, I know
literally this is anti-science being promoted as social science.
Almost all of this is, right, because internally it's consistent, but you'll see on my bullet points I said reminder, no falsifiability. Nothing that comes from these critical theories is ever falsifiable. They don't adhere to that standard. They just don't adhere to it. They internally say, for example, they don't believe there's such thing as not a racist, right? You're either a racist who admits their own fragility, or you're a racist that doesn't. And any opposition to this is, and this is in their writing, right? This is not something I'm making up. Any opposition to that is just a way to preserve your own privilege.
Repeat that. So if you say they're wrong on any level, that's just you trying to hold on to your privilege? Even if it's just like...
It's hold on to your privilege, or to protect the status quo that promotes white supremacy. This is, I mean, it's repeated often in their writings, especially in Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. Like she just says, like, straight up, any opposition to anything I wrote is usually, I mean, the only reason somebody could possibly oppose this is that they don't want to admit their white fragility, and they want to hold on to their privilege.
Okay. So what about the non-white people that don't agree?
Once again, they just suffer from false consciousness. Because when they actually look at people, they don't actually look at individuals. They just look at people of how good of a representative are of how good of a representative to their group, as defined by critical theorists, how good of a representative they are. So that's where you get the idea that Candace Owens, I mean, I have plenty of problems with her. It's not about her specifically, but she is not a black voice, according to these people. Because a black voice would have to be in line with what a theory says a black voice should say.
So mixed race people just don't exist in this world.
I mean, they would be on the intersectional hierarchy somewhere.
Really? Then why? I'm trying to figure out where I fit into this whole paradigm here, Excel. Where am I supposed to be arguing from?
You already don't fall into this paradigm, because no matter what race you identify as, you disagree with this, and therefore you are inherently problematic and inherently a racist.
Oh, because I have more than one race in my background, and I see no point in hating any aspect of my background, I'm a racist?
Yes. I mean, essentially, it's... Once again, all this stuff sounds crazy, but it is completely in line with the writing. And I know you've gone through at least some of this stuff that I've tried to show you, and you've seen this.
Excel. God,
well,
dude!
You don't want it to be true. Like, you don't want it to be, and this is actually being taught in the academy.
Okay, so they're literally denying the existence of 20% of America. just throwing them out entirely. They don't exist because it's about 20% of America now that's mixed race in some fashion. It's a good chunk of our country. So they're literally saying those people don't exist unless they decide to ignore part of their background in some fashion.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to say they exist. Like, once again, this just comes back to the false consciousness, which is juxtaposed with critical consciousness, which is a person that is hyper aware of this and is constantly pointing out problematics, which I will get to eventually. I am a terrible host, and I just want to address the chat real quick. I know I got Sinrise in there, Gulf City Nicholas Donka. By the way, I was trying to do this while my mic was muted. Ryan himself, Stone Monkey, Danny, TM, what's up? We got Gulf City, Thomas the Peasant, Cinder Shadow Gaming, Blue Collar Canuck, Carl. Of course, he's in here, right? Because you're streaming.
Yeah, he's good egg.
Some of the comments.
But Sinrise has been absolutely correct because he says the media pumps out shit that makes people watch so they can sell advertising. There's no ideological imperative. Outrage sells. It doesn't matter if it's founded on anything real. And on top of that, the media is a dinosaur industry that spends money trying to cancel the competition instead of making a better product. Yeah, the mainstream media is truly an enemy of the people. It really is and it's filled with these fucksticks. It's filled with these critical race psychos.
Yeah, so I will say that's true to an extent. We've seen a lot of media organizations shutting down. There is actually a real problem, and I think it's going to be a little bit before corporate America kind of picks up on this. But as these people infiltrate and become maybe like 9% of the organization, which is an obviously activist ideology, the actual activists don't give a shit about the money, but these corporations are kowtowing to them. So I think, I mean, just to go to the term, I think we're going to see a lot more get woke, go broke in the future.
I think we're already starting to see it, and that's why we're having so much cancel culture and the begging and the everybody jumping on the Black Lives Matter bandwagon.
See, and you bring up cancel culture, and I just want to try to stick to my bullet points in order as best as possible.
Okay.
So I have to talk about tolerance real quick, because this is the last thing that came from the thinkers of the 30s and 40s that were the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, which is their idea on tolerance, right? So tolerance in the liberal sense, the classical liberal sense, is allowing that which I don't like.
Yes.
They came up with this idea of repressive tolerance. And all that really means is there are certain ideas that will lead towards intolerance. And if we identify those ideas, then we need to repress them in order to make a more tolerant society.
Oh, that explains a lot. Because that's literally the opposite of what tolerance is.
Yes, this was a guy named Marcuse who wrote an essay on repressive tolerance. And the worst part is I actually read the article, and it was heavy. Like, a lot of this shit is really hard to read, which is why I'm trying to do this stream and dumb this down. But it starts out and says things that, like, I mean, you can kind of believe and understand. But then it comes to this conclusion where we have to do things where we punish people socially for doing these things that will lead towards intolerance. And by the way, what is intolerant is basically, once again, it's whatever goes against what the critical theorists say. The irony between all of this and how a lot of these people consider themselves like anti-fascist and they hate being called totalitarianism or totalitarianist. But there's a very bourgeois philosopher king, like type of theme that's kind of going through this, where, you know, what the kind of things that we need to repress is just whatever the critical theorists say they are, right? Like, there's no objective standard. It's just they find this problematic and we need to repress it.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, because this makes no sense. Because, like, the premise for current anti-racism, which we need to come up with a derogatory religious term for these people. Like, I don't know. Vegan.
Yeah,
or something.
I really liked cultural Marxism as a pejorative towards them, but I think critical social justice. I think that's enough to explain to people that you're talking about something specific.
Well, not if they don't understand that, because when you're taught critical thinking in school, see what they're doing is they're using the unwillful ignorance of the masses to justify changing language here, because people are going to assume that, when you say critical theory, you're talking about critical thinking.
Well, yeah, no, and this is part of the like the language, some of the
That's what I'm saying.
dishonest tactics, which they use bait and switch on language.
It's like the switching from equality to equity and claiming they're the same thing. It's wholly intellectually. Okay, so I guess that's really where we're having the trouble, is that we aren't even speaking the same language as these people anymore.
Absolutely not. Like, you have to understand their definitions, which is, I mean, that's really the whole idea behind. And to everybody in the chat, I'll make sure I put this in the show notes. But newdiscourses.com has a translations from the Wokest. It's basically an encyclopedia of all the buzzwords that social justice warriors like to use. And the great thing about it is, first off, these people are real academics. They try not to be snooty. I know you have a problem with James Lindsay because of him actually doing a podcast expressing his personal opinions.
Well, it's okay. I don't have a problem with him as a person, and I don't even have a problem with his opinions. I don't care if he likes Trump. I don't care. Okay, I like him because he's an asshole, and I'm an asshole, and I find that relatable.
Yeah. Well, for the
what
first time,
though, what I have a problem
though,
with is a frenetic list of don't do all these things, even though you want to be part of the problem or part of the solution, because it's stressful. So it was an irrational list of stuff. It wasn't him personally. It was the incongruity of that stream that bothered me most.
Yeah, just going back to it. So what this is done is given a resource that really opened up my eyes to what's going on, because it'll start with the definition. It will actually cite the sources of where this is coming from, and then kind of explain why, like, even though they have this internal consistency, like, what the issues with this definition is.
See, I don't see
I'm a
any
huge
internal
fan of that.
consistency here. See, I could tear apart their consistency all day long.
Well,
See,
no.
I don't see any consistency.
Well, so it's one of those things where they define themselves outside of criticism. Like I said, that's the lack of falsifiability.
Yeah. Okay.
So this brings me. So we've covered that. That's what the critical theorists had to offer. Like, we've covered what they've done. So let's move on to what they've took from postmodernists, which are not the same as critical theorists. It's a very different thing. So
no, one is tongue in cheek and a little bitter. The other is psychotic and misanthropic.
Yeah, I actually don't think the postmodernist. It's really hard to point the finger at them, because even though that these people borrowed a lot of ideas from postmodernism, the postmodernists weren't prescriptive. They weren't dogmatic. Some of them, like Foucault, they had huge problems with the state. A lot of libertarians are a fan of Foucault just because he kind of came with ideas that, and I'm actually going to read a quote, because I don't necessarily disagree with this, but you can see how taken to be anything more than a warning about having a little bit of humility as to what you think is true, and run amok like it has in critical social justice.
Well, it's because they've removed the entire Socratic premise to finding truth. They've decided that truth is just what you experience in the moment, not a series of verifiable, Socratic, Aristotelian, whatever you want to call it, classical thought on measuring the reality you experience. But we've talked about this. They don't think that the conscious or the experience, the reality, verifiable experience is real. They think it's not, right? They think only what you feel is real, but what you touch is not. Am I right here?
Yeah, I mean, so the quote is, knowledge and truth are deemed to be entirely contingent cultural artifacts, and postmodern theory holds that whether or not knowledge and truth claims correspond in any faithful way to reality misses the point. And to go further, what they say is that what is true is whatever the dominant power structure says is true. So once again, whether or not it corresponds in reality in any faithful way misses the point.
Okay, how does this exist still? Like, how did this? How? I'm so confused. How do you get there?
Well, once again, like I can actually take this and see that there are a lot of things that are pushed onto us as being true, and we just kind of hold it to be true because other people have told us to, and we didn't think to disprove it or anything like that. But functionally, as a society, it operates as these things are true, even if they're not. So I actually see that point from the postmodernist perspective. But I don't think I don't think they were trying to say that objective truth doesn't exist. It was just have a little bit of humility. Like consider whether or not this is actually true versus if it's kind of being pushed upon you. So in that sense, if you read it that way, it's kind of backwards to what's going on with the way they use truth in current critical social justice.
Give me 2 shakes, please.
All right. Let's see what's going on in the chat here. Yeah, don't all lives matter, not just Black lives. I came up with a new slogan: "All lives matter since life begins at conception, not perception." Yeah, I've also thought maybe we should just say lives matter. It's like we'll just get rid of all, no qualifier, like life matters. Period.
Well, I'm saying people do that. And it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's getting them a bit of a negatory on their social media platforms. Like several people are getting canceled right now because of it. So we're not allowed to say anything but Black Lives Matter right now.
Well, yeah, because
if you do, because I'll show you how little you don't matter.
Yep, and it's because of repressive tolerance. Because anything that might kind of conflict with theory, right, is problematic, and we need to cancel it. We got to get rid of it.
But there's no way to prove that it's problematic. See, that's what I don't get is, okay, so the first thing in the encyclopedia, because it's an encyclopedia, it goes by numbers. So the first thing that comes up in the New Discourses Encyclopedia is the 1619 Project. Now, he openly admits that it is a completely not factual curriculum and program that's being introduced, yet the schools have taken it on, and the only thing it is intended to do is say that America was founded on racism and slavery. That's its only purpose. It has no factual grounding, yet somehow a newspaper or a magazine, whatever you want to call it, is allowed to produce school curriculum.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is why this stuff is a real fucking problem, and I wanted to do a stream on it, at least trying to get to the surface of it. Like, this might have to be, like, a series we do, Themma. Anytime we come up with something that's happening, to discuss the specifics of things like the 1619 Project, which is a critical historiography that doesn't actually tell the story in any way that's actually sensible to the evidence.
It doesn't even hold up like accurate shit. It's like, why the fuck are they tearing down Thomas Jefferson statues? Like, you want to talk about the biggest advocate against slavery this country has ever had? Thomas Jefferson was such a big abolitionist advocate that the state of Virginia's governorship and leadership decided to vote right as he was getting sick and dying to keep him from freeing his slaves because they were afraid of having educated Black people released on the populace.
Yeah, so and this is where all that stuff is stuff that, like, us normal people understand. But when you're indoctrinated into this critical social justice way of thinking, what they do is they take basically morality as we would understand today, and then they come
apply
up
it to people from 400 or 500 years ago.
and they come up with a plausible explanation as to why everything that happened historically has just been this giant thing to continue promoting white supremacy throughout the years.
Even though there's no proof of that whatsoever.
Uh,
But these are the same people that'll tell you that determinism is true and that free will doesn't exist. So do keep that in mind, people.
Yeah, I mean, I can get off on a little bit of a tangent on that. Is these people also believe in the whole tabula rasa idea of humanity. They think
What?
that everybody is born as a blank slate, and almost everything is a social construction, which is also something they took from postmodernism. That's where the idea of something being a social construction is more than just kind of a kind of a benign way of saying that like people came together and organized these things, and so in that sense technically society made it a social construction. um in that sense they also went a little bit further and said that, well, if you can socially construct things in this manner, you can deconstruct it and reconstruct it in a way that'll be more equitable. Which is that, I mean, that's where the gap is. Like, social constructs we know are real. Um, but
Well,
in some
obviously, that's
sense,
what
it's,
religion is.
well, yeah, and well, so they go all the way to knowledge as being a social construct.
Nope.
Well, and
There's
so,
no
well,
way to prove that.
yeah, well, so, and here's what's funny, and this is the commentary that they made. So, in a technical, banal, if not vapid sense, knowledge is a social construction. But in the more profound and meaningful sense of how people use the term, it's not. So this is just a trick that social justice turns upon over and over again.
So it's a
Right.
double entendre. They're claiming
Well,
that
no.
reality is a double entendre.
Well, right, because we came up with the idea of how we are going to find knowledge, but that has real meaning, right? We actually can test things, and once again, me and you can decide, like, so what's going to happen if you ride a bike straight into a tree? And then we can watch that happen and come to conclusions, and whatever happens and we observe, you know, we're gonna call that, like, there's gonna be points of agreement. We agree that happened.
Yeah.
Right. But we constructed that method of determining, even though, like I said, if it's banal, if not vapid.
It's beyond vapid. Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's I get what you're saying.
You get what I'm saying, because you have to work back. They try to use this idea that, oh,
They're using
gender is a social construct. They're using it as calling something a social construct is just a point to prove it wrong when it's not. Like, there's no, like, defining something as a social construct, which just means people kind of came together to agree that this is a thing, versus there's no objective truth behind that social construct and there's nothing useful behind it. Like, there's the gap between those two concepts is 10 miles wide, right? Like, you can't just say, oh, it's a social construct, and then deny that there's some objective truth behind that we can find and we can use to process reality in a way that's useful.
Yeah. They're advocating for the wrong half of critical thought here. I mean, like, this is crazy. Like, really crazy. Like, properly, like, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, you guys need medication kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and this comes from, like, the whole social constructionist thing and the idea of objectivity. That comes from postmodernism, which they didn't believe that there was such thing as objective truth.
Not all of them, but some of them, yeah. I'd say that's my problem too. Is when we discuss postmodernity as a philosophy, it's actually rather broad.
It is, and they, like I said, they were just kind of, I mean, the postmodernists, they were just kind of musings, right? They weren't sitting there, they weren't advocating for revolution based on postmodernism.
No, they weren't. Never. That was never a thing. But okay, so what are the buzzwords people need to know about so they can respond correctly? Because we've named the thing, but we need to figure out how to rebut it. Because if you have people that are refusing to admit that reality is, how do you combat that?
I mean, that's a great question. I don't necessarily have the answer, but I think understanding that where they're coming from makes a lot of sense. Like, so first off, if somebody is going to talk about how knowledge is all subjective, like once again, I would say in a banal, vapid sense that could that could be true, right? Like, it's kind of like, how do you disprove a god, or like, what if there really are invisible pink unicorns that are behind everything in the universe, right? Things that aren't falsifiable.
That would be fucking awesome.
But
Anyway.
so what you have to do is just in some of these senses just be like, look, nobody's advocating some sort of absolute objective standard. What we're saying is we have models that me and you can agree upon, right, that are neutral, and I can go out and I can say, all right, look, we're gonna study the likelihood of cops shooting black people in situations versus white people, and we're gonna identify a bunch of independent variables, and we're gonna use those as a measure, and we're going to use all the data we have available to come to some conclusion. And as the data comes in, we will at least agree that, like, yes, this is the data, these were our variables. So we'll have some sort of standard that, at least between you and I, are objective.
Yes.
Right? Like, we can both agree because we've agreed on this model. And it might come back and show that there's no actual bias between police shootings, once we've identified all the proper variables.
Okay.
Right. And that's a sense of objectivity. I mean, science works the same way, right? Like, Newton versus, like I said, Newton versus Einstein, right? Einstein disproved Newton, but it's because he had these objective standards, and he just said that if Newton was right, these things would also, or these things would necessarily have to be falsified now.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out how we respond to them. Because I understand that
Nostradamus the Great says, Excel, if somebody asks you if you're a god, you say yes.
You say yes.
You
always.
Say yes. I totally agree.
Yes. What is that from? Oh my God.
Ghostbusters.
Thank you. I was like, I know this line. Just so you people know, I had to drink an extra cup of coffee and I had to drink an extra dose of weed because, man, this is a hard subject and I'm still fucking confused, people, because I'm like 4 times mixed race and I'm trying to go, wait a fucking minute. Like, my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a slave owner. I might have too many greats in there. And he wasn't a slave owner. He married a woman who was a slave owner, and he fell in love with one of the slaves, and then they got disowned. And then she died, and then the slave and the doctor moved to the Midwest, and they had kids, and one of their kids married a Native American. So, like, all this stuff that they're talking about with all the racism and blah, 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 I'm fucking living proof they're wrong. So, for me, it's very, very hard to wrap my head around racists. Very, very hard for me to wrap my head around the country being racist, considering that my family was marrying slaves before the slaves were free. So, yeah.
Well, none of it matters because it's all about just being an appropriate representative of whatever group you belong to based on what critical theory says it is.
But I don't belong to any of the groups, Excel.
Yeah, well, you can make up your own.
Okay, well, mine is the nobody's racist group.
Yeah, well, that doesn't conform with theory, so it doesn't work.
I know. So I'm just trying to really understand because, quite frankly, the website is full of information, but guys, it is full of information. And well, James Lindsay has a lot to say.
It's heavy as fuck, and that's why I'm trying to do this to give my dumb explanation. Like, I'm not giving you guys like perfect knowledge on this, but I think, like, first off, we've laid down like where critical theory and postmodernism come, like how that comes to create this new fucking monster, because neither one of them alone are nearly as sinister as what's actually going on in the academy right now. And we haven't even gotten to my next topic, which is anti-racism.
Okay. Okay, so we've at least titled and said what critical social justice is. Critical social justice is the impossible mindset that even if something isn't wrong, we're going to find something that's wrong because we just want to break your shit because we're jealous. Or did I get too reductive with that?
If you want to be super cynical, sure, right? Like it's bad, and we all understand it's bad, but we don't. This is where I said I think a lot of people kind of like miss what's really going on in these academic circles. It's insane the way the idea laundry is going on. So I'm going.
Don't send your kids to college. Just don't.
Right. So I'm gonna read this straight from this is Ibram X, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Right. This is directly out of his book. The opposite of racist isn't not racist. It is anti-racist. What's the difference? One endorses either the idea of a racial hierarchy as racist or racial equality as anti-racist. One either believes problems are rooted in groups of people as a racist or locates the roots of problem in power and policies as an anti-racist. One either allows racial inequalities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequalities as an anti-racist. There is no in-between safe space of not racist. The claim of not racist neutrality is a mask for racism. This may seem harsh, but it's important at the outset that we apply one of the core principles of anti-racism, which is to return the word racist itself back to its proper usage. Racist is not, as Richard Spencer argues, a pejorative. It is not the worst word in the English language. It is not the equivalent of a slur. It's a descriptive, and the only way to undo racism is to consistently identify and describe it and then dismantle it.
Okay.
I know that sounds heavy, but this is theory basically saying in a lot of words that you're either a racist or an anti-racist. That's it. There's no other option. And being an anti-racist, it actually means going further. It means a lifelong dedication to pointing out anytime there is any sort of inequity between races and finding the problematics and calling it out as racist.
She turned me into a newt, but it got better.
Well, and using these kind of definitions is how they do a very good job of preying on people's liberal sensibilities, right? Like, nobody wants to be called a racist. Especially imagine if you're like a young teenager, right? 18, going into college. And you're being told...
my 13-year-old will flip and lose her shit if somebody calls her a racist. This is like young kids freak out.
Yeah, nobody wants to be called a racist. And then, you're 18, you go into college, and you learn that you've been a racist all this time because you are not being adequately an activist calling out racism based on what critical theory says racism is.
Even though they don't define what racism is other than it's systems that need to be broken down. Because we haven't had a definition of what racism is. We've just been told it's not things.
Yeah, I mean, so once again, they operate from this tabula rasa thing where every person is basically a blank slate, and the only reason that there would be any group differences is because some sort of racism prevails, and that the only answer to that is to dismantle the system. I actually have dismantle somewhere else, but dismantle just means break down the liberal system. And I mean liberal in the very classical sense of, like, we live in a society
a libertarian
that kind of
society.
Well, we live even in America, right? Like, throughout our history, Like, we've gone from abolishing slavery to women's suffrage to the Civil Rights Act. Like, we've worked to de-emphasize the importance of categories like race in favor of judging people as an individual. But that is not enough for these people, because that system did not create a society where I can look at every group and see equitable outcomes between all groups.
Okay, but you can't see that anywhere ever. So,
of course, you can't see it. You can't even study other countries, other states. Thomas
but no, there's
Sowell
no
in
point
Race
in
and
history where
Discrimination.
there's been actual equality. Like, this is a thing
Not
that's
not
never
not
happened
not
in human history.
not in that sense, right? Because liberal equality means something very different than what
It's
critical equality means.
It's equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, because outcome has to do with what the person chooses to do with the opportunity.
Yeah, liberal equality just means you live under a system of rules that no matter who you are, the rules apply equally to you.
Yes.
And this critical, which is very kind of a Marxist equality thing, which is why it's not inaccurate to compare this to Marxism, even though they don't really have any kind of coherent economic theory. You're not going to see that anywhere on this.
They don't have a theory for anything. They're just bitching about stuff. This is literally the Karen's religion. Like, it needs to be called Karenosity or something, because it's literally just bitching for the sake of bitching and taking shit down for no reason. It is pure true nihilism.
It is. You're right, but this shit is coming up in your school boards.
Not my school board. My school board is my living room. But I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's been spreading. It was just recently. It was Littleton, Colorado. Decided that it was going to issue a statement that they're going to teach kids that it's not enough to not be racist. That they're going to teach anti-racism to them.
Oh, did parents freak out?
Not yet. I mean, I hope they do. It's probably going to be a lot like intelligent design, when intelligent design was being injected into certain school systems.
Well, okay, intelligent design used to be taught in tandem with Big Bang Theory. It used to be taught, they were comparative. But they changed that 20 years ago.
Well, I mean, they taught it they were trying to sneak it in science, right? But what kept happening is they didn't even need court rulings. What happened is you would have people get elected to school boards, which were activists that wanted to have intelligent design being taught in science classrooms. That's the important part.
Oh, we always learned it in religion.
Yeah. So they wanted it to be taught in science classrooms as an alternative theory to evolution. And without even the court ruling that you couldn't do this, what would happen? What happened? Well, what happened constantly is, so the activists showed up at first. But then the parents, they saw this coming home, and they were just like, even religious parents were like, I don't need my kid that I want to get into a good college learning this pseudoscience in their science class and believing it's actually science. And the parents eventually came back, and they showed up and got elected to the school board and kicked out the people that were pushing intelligent design. In fact, what I'm talking about right there is exactly how a lot of this works in the colleges, because this ideology is inherently an activist ideology. In fact, there's a book about critical theories in 2012 that was written where it talks about how, if like adopting this is a lifelong adherence to fighting racism and inequality. Like, it is inherently an activist doctrine. And
it's a religious doctrine if it's saying that.
Well, yeah, so very religious people are also very activist. So what's happening is the activists are showing up. They're showing up to the faculty meetings. They're showing up to the board meetings. They're the people that are emailing and creating boards and whatnot at their company. And because they're the only, like, they're very, very vocal, they have a disproportionate amount of power when it comes to things like, art academia, when it comes to even your boards at your company that are right now trying to deal with how we're going to handle the idea of race and inequality in wake of a lot of pressure that is also being put onto them by the activist.
Okay. So this is, yeah, okay. So what we're looking at is it's the satanic panic of the 80s. But we're now doing it with non-religious.
Well, yeah, no, it's incredibly similar because we've seen it with the way cancel culture is working, where you don't even allow people to potentially make mistakes. Like anything in their past that might be problematic, like they've got to wipe that out. They have to punish that person, because if they don't, then to them it means that this could continue to go on, and if it continued to go on, it's going to continue to promote what they would call these systems of inequality.
Okay. Well, okay, I'm still trying to figure out what the fuck we're supposed to do.
Well, I mean, a lot of it is just understanding, one, this is unfalsifiable bullshit. It is close to religious dogma. You can be religious and understand. So one of the things that I don't think I even brought up with you is I'm not an anti-theist anymore. I used to be.
Yes.
I am now. I have no problem with people that are theists. In fact, a lot of those people are allied with me because they kind of agree that they keep religion as being this personal thing to them. And they don't sit there. They're not just sitting there trying to argue that they have some hidden knowledge or objective truth. A lot of them are just being like, well, that's where faith comes in.
Well, yeah, that's usually what a religious person will say.
Yeah. And when somebody comes to me and says, like, if their point is, I don't need to prove the existence of God to you, this is a thing of faith for me, we have no argument, because they've actually just kind of admitted that they don't necessarily believe that there's any information they have that is some crazy hidden knowledge that they could show to me to prove that they were right.
Okay. Okay, and you're saying that this is the same premise these people are using?
It's very similar in the sense that they're not going to defer to faith, because that would completely ruin what they're trying to do. It's worse. They're saying that no, this is the real truth, and any opposition, yeah.
My truth, I'm speaking truth to power. Hey, Irate.
Exactly. Hey, y'all. I just wanted to pop in and catch what y'all were talking about, because, yeah, it is like religious dogma is what's being pushed right now, and it's textbook, Marxist bullshit. It's just about power. This is about grabbing power now instead of money, right? I don't know. Where are y'all at in the discussion?
We're just trying to name things because we can't even figure out. Okay, so we've discussed that critical social justice theory, which is what these people are doing, is basically Karening. It's basically just bitching for the sake of bitching because they're unhappy about a thing, even if the thing they're unhappy about is not what they're bitching about.
So we've all been blessed with the curse of original sin, which in our case is racism. We're all white racists, and we can't know.
Even if you're not white.
Yeah, no,
exactly.
It's funny because my next thing on my little bullet points after anti-racism was white fragility, where she basically says that exact same thing, right? So that book, first off, I just want to say, if you read it, it was her admitting her own racist thoughts. Like, she actually had these racist thoughts. So instead of saying, like, fuck, man, I got these racist thoughts, maybe I should self-reflect, she decided everybody that's white has these thoughts. And what we have to do is we have to admit our white fragility and come to our senses, which is very similar to the original sin. Right?
Well, it's projection. It's really unhealthy projection.
Sir Adamantine says we're both too intelligent for this platform.
Oh, he's talking about you and Irate.
Oh, me and Irate?
No, he's talking about you, XL. He's right. He's right.
Well, so like, look, I just want to explain to people the reason I wanted to have this talk, and the reason I invited Themma specifically is because she was very open minded to talk about this. Because I've seen a lot of people be very dismissive, and I've had to explain to people that some of the things they're talking about when I say this is critical theories, and they're like, no, it's something else, and then they describe what that something else is, and I was like, you don't understand. This is all encompassed in what critical theories are doing right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we don't understand that, if the people that are like trying to fight against it don't know what they're doing, what their language is, what these words mean, how are you ever going to combat it? This is why cultural Marxism, when we described it, was a fail, because we didn't have the whole story. What we did is we pointed and laughed, and we used our own intuitive, like I said, liberal way of thinking. And when I say the word liberal, first off, I say we take it back. We stop letting liberal just mean the left. We take it back to what it meant, with rooted in liberty, descend into the Enlightenment, like where we come with the objectivity, where science developed. Honestly, because these ideas are explicitly anti-liberal. They will say that in their writings that they are anti-liberal. They're fighting against liberalism.
Almost 200 years old. You know, that's something that I don't hear a lot of people point out, that Marxism, you know, and the critical theory, that whole school were in the 1850s.
Well, critical theory was specifically like 1940s disillusioned Marxist.
Yeah, but what they do is they just strip it down and then they put a different coat of paint on it. It's the same shit, in my opinion.
Thomas Gall City, the Peasant, thanks for showing up.
Yeah. Later, Thomas. I always want to say Thomas Howell when I see his name.
I'm actually on board. Like, I'm just let's take back the word liberal. I was talking to a Themma the other day. We were kind of doing a primer for this. Is there's even a liberal argument for progressivism, and I know that a Themma. I mean, you guys had some disagreements, but you have the John Stuart Mill's philosophy, which I think kind of opened up allowing socialism into liberal ideas. But
yes,
they still weren't socialist, right? Their whole idea was, we believe in all this, we believe in the objective standards, we believe in liberalism. We just think when society gets to a certain point, there might be room for government to reallocate some resources into certain places. But we still believe in capitalism. We still believe in free markets. And I think that's very important, because we're not arguing against those people right now. I'm not arguing against the person that's like Sargon of Akkad, which believes that, I think that even though it's expensive, I think it might have net benefits to do universal healthcare, for instance. Right? Like we're arguing with people that believe in some Marxist utopia where universal healthcare is inherently just going to be better. It's going to save us money. There's going to be no issue on the economy whatsoever for taxing people for this. That's completely different from the idea that, like, yes, there's a give and take. Like, there's going to be some things that are going to be worse if we move that direction, and some things that would be better. I would love to have those kind of arguments again, but that's not what we're dealing with right now.
No, we're dealing with psychosis. This is like worse than this. Like, I keep saying it's like the Spanish Inquisition, because it really is. Because right now, it's if you don't put the right sign up, if you don't wear the right thing, we very much are in the middle of a modern Spanish Inquisition, guys. We really, really, very much are.
Yeah, I mean, the comparison to this to religion is incredibly accurate, because it's like what I told you before, is like you have your bishops in academia, right? You have your priests that have been spread out through different cultural institutions like the media and even to some extent government. And then you have your inquisitioners, which are your people that are on Twitter finding anybody that says anything that they would consider problematic in the way we described and ensuring that they get canceled. And their justification for doing that to somebody is it's repressive tolerance.
Okay.
Well, and that kind of fits even that word right there you just use, regressive tolerance.
It was repressive, and it's something we talked about a little bit
Repressive, my bad.
earlier. It was something we talked about earlier, which is, I mean,
A terrifying concept, I rate.
yeah,
Terrifying.
and it's yeah, but it's where like you have to kind of understand that that like it didn't just show up this way, right? Like this idea of repressive tolerance happened a while ago, and now it's being used by a critical theorist.
Hey,
Right.
doctor. So the one thing I was going to say is horrifying about this. So the concept is, and this is going to scare you as somebody who studies the mind and has studied the mind. So the idea is that there are certain behaviors that will stop tolerance, and you have to be intolerant of those behaviors.
And hence we have the conundrum, which is bullshit, right?
Yeah. It's wholly terrifying from a developmental standpoint. From like they call evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology, not biology. Evolutionary psychology is considered problematic because it can actually describe and explain the differences between groups or men and women throughout time. The horrifying idea through this tolerance is that if you have somebody who gets angry a lot, and where anger can be used to fuel all kinds of other actions and do stuff, they think that just because there is an anger at all, that needs to be stomped out because it could breed a possible intolerance. So it's actually more insidious and more dangerous than religious thought.
Yeah, I mean, it actually, and that goes, so anti-fascism was one of the next things I had on here. But anti-fascism, I mean, we both know it's bullshit. But if you understand repressive tolerance and what anti-fascists say and everything they're against, they look to liberal ideology. Once again, I'm saying it classical. They look at that as being inherently problematic because if you subscribe to that, if you could subscribe to that, they say it could possibly in some way turn into fascism.
Because you're allowed to think. Do you see what the wholly terrifying premise here is, Irene?
yeah, it could possibly, you know.
Just, well, yeah. You know, so, and this is one of the things where, I bring, like I'm saying, like we need to take back the word liberal. So, fascism and communism they're inherently anti-liberal philosophies. So, but what's going on with these anti-fascists is that they think that if they don't quell liberal ideology, people might go back to fascism because they think inevitably some sort of revolution is going to happen. The fascists actually agree to this. This is why people that like us look at fascism and communism as like basically two sides of the same coin, right?
Yes.
They're authoritarian, totalitarian ideologies that we don't like. But if you look at it from the perspective of, and they're also both anti-liberal ideologies, but if you look at it from the perspective of fascism, what they see is to the right, they see fascism, right? And even further to the right, they see liberalism.
Wait, so fascism is the lesser of the evils?
No, I mean, no. Like if you're gonna do it on that 3D or the 2D axis or whatever, right? So you have authoritarian centrism as fascism, which has that racial component to it. Which actually, proper fascism did not necessarily have a racial component. It was it had a national component, but.
They had an Italian component, but okay.
And then further to the left, you see the same level of authoritarianism. You see the communist movement, right? So to them, they're diametrically opposed. But then if you look way further to the right and down to the, like I said, instead of saying libertarian versus authoritarian, I'll say liberal versus anti-liberal. So down in the anti-liberal space to the right, you see liberalism. And they look at that, and so they're looking past the fascist, right? And right behind them, they see the liberals. Like, behind them, and a little bit to the right. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Excel.
What's up?
Okay. I totally forgot what I was going to say again. I'm just, fuck. Sorry, I was looking, the chat is having a very interesting conversation because Monkey said he prefers to have opposing views around him. It helps him keep his mind more open and get more ideas. And a lot of other people have said they do too. I prefer having opposition to my ideas because that allows me to steelman my own argument and make sure I'm correct. Ayn Rand had a brilliant quote, just check your premise.
Well, and that's part of the reason I'm doing this stream is I'm trying to explain these opposing viewpoints. Like, I'm actually studying them. There's
God bless you for it.
It is incredibly, like, this is something that's been pretty consistent. Like, people that are being called far right now, which none of us are. I'm pretty sure that Themma, if we were arguing on policies and we were just going through the list of typical policies, me, you, and Irate would have a lot of disagreement, but we all agree that this shit is bullshit, right? Like, we don't want to deal with this. You want it kicked out of the public mind. We want it out of our fucking schools, out of our colleges, out of our media.
Well, okay, so how do we bring people out of this, though? That's been my biggest question this whole time. I can name a thing all I want.
I like my solution.
What?
You're not going to like my solution.
Well, yeah, my solution involves helicopters and Pinochet. Help anybody either.
Helicopter rides?
No, I'm just talking about lining them up and just bullet to the back of the head.
Yeah.
I mean, we got a whole generation of retarded motherfuckers that have had this shit hammered into their heads. Their reality has been manipulated on a daily basis, right? So they have to reset their whole intellectual stance every day. Think about that. Think about how much you have to lose mentally to get there. They're fucking automatons, man.
Thank you, Carl. Put up my contradictions. Quote, contradictions do not exist. If you find yourself faced with a contradiction, check your premises. One of them is wrong. But, okay, sorry. Thank you, Carl. I was trying to remember, but check your premise. So I say it all the fucking time. People get mad at me for it, but check your fucking premise. People. Sorry.
So
okay, so how do we name it and shame it and get it out of their minds? How do we do it? I mean, other than a bullet to the brain, how do we save an entire generation of people that have been taught that everything is racist and the word problematic has been replaced with Jesus?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what we've done in this stream is actually step one, right? Identify who we're talking about, and then you can kind of explain why it's ridiculous, right? You can explain why the idea of anti-racism and white fragility are bullshit. Like, they're unfalsifiable, and they've defined themselves in a way that is it's just insane, right? And
I need to qualify.
And when you can actually point to exactly what they're saying about it, and then say, like, this is ridiculous, right? Like, it's like being anti-racist. What they're doing is they're trying to go against what our liberal ideology would think, which is de-emphasize race as much as possible and look at the individual. You can look at their idea of equity. You can look at, like, actual studies and, like, look, it doesn't really matter. Like, you're going to see differences between groups no matter what, right? Like, a real fair society just needs to uphold that everybody applies to the same standards and that those standards in and of themselves are just. And there's, like, real arguments to be had about things that are going on right now. Like police brutality. Like, I want to have that argument. I hate the fact that I'm defending police, and my real problem isn't with police, it's with the laws. But I hate the fact that I'm doing it, but I cannot have that argument until I realize that these people that just want to disrupt and dismantle.
I'm in the same boat, Excel. I am so anti-union, it's not funny. I am so firmly against unions existing in this country, and I have been since I was young. And I have to defend one of the most unionized groups in America right now in order to be able to hopefully someday ununionize them, because we have a bunch of people saying we should have no law enforcement at all whatsoever in our nation. And that is the scariest concept I've ever heard of in my life.
Yeah, I'm gonna go real quick to the dishonest tactics, and I'm gonna wrap this up because what you're bringing me to is something that's going on that you see with these people very often, and I think this is one of the things that James did very, very accurately is describing what's going on, which is what they do is they use Motte-and-Bailey rhetoric.
Yes, this was a brilliant description.
Yeah. So most people aren't going to know what that. I didn't know what it was until I listened to it, right? So you have this idea is the Motte and the Bailey, right? And it goes back to kind of like medieval castle invasions. So what the Motte would be is this high point, like on a tower, where you have a very strong position and you can shoot arrows. And it's very hard to defend or to disagree that the Motte has a very strong position. But then the Bailey is just the place out in the open, right, where a lot of crazy shit's going on and things are very weak and
life is occurring. That's where life is occurring. It's the dangerous place.
Well, yeah, sure, right. So, but what they do is they come up with these things like the Motte. It's like, oh, you disagree that there's an issue with black communities being very, inequitable. What are you, some racist? And then in the Bailey, they're sitting there trying to redefine equity. They're sitting there trying to tell you that there's no objective truth. So what they do is whenever you call them out on the bullshit they're doing in the Bailey, they go back to the Motte, right? They go back to the Motte with the strong position, which nobody can disagree with, which is, my example is, like, in general, black communities are doing worse than white communities. Like, that argument is strong. I can agree with that. There's actually, I don't know how to oppose that. And then they go back to the Bailey where they just run amok with their own descriptions as to what's going on.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so how he described the Motte and the Bailey was, okay, so back in medieval times, the Motte is where you had, it was a fortification system. So the Bailey was the lower areas where you had the regular houses and the marketplaces, and the Motte was the hold. So what would happen is everybody wants to be in the Motte. So when things would go bad, everybody goes to the Motte to be protected. But when things aren't bad, everybody's in the Bailey. So the Motte and Bailey is they basically switch the two positions. So you think you're in the Motte, but they frame the argument so that you're actually in the Bailey. It's even though you think you're in the Motte. It's literally a bait and switch. It's when did you stop beating your wife?
Right.
Or did you finally stop beating your wife?
And that goes to the Kafka traps and the bait and switch, which are all similar, right? So
yeah, they're all kind of the same, and that's the mealy mouth shit. Because you'll be like, "No, this is wrong," and you'll see it commonly. I'll use one that's all over the place right now. Did Trump tell people to ingest disinfectants? No, he didn't. But they'll say, "You actually believe Trump?" Or so Trump said, are we going to be able to disinfect the inside of the body at some point? That turns into Trump told people to ingest disinfectants. Somebody says, you actually believe, or somebody makes the statement, Trump told people to ingest disinfectants. You say, no, actually what he asked is if we're going to disinfect the inside of the body. And then they go back to, oh, well, that's saying ingest disinfectants. There's nothing intellectually consistent in the argument. So when you go to make the argument, you have to be in as crazy a position as they are to defend or deconstruct, to use their own language, to deconstruct their own thing. So it's not necessarily, and that's where I disagree with him on the Motte-and-Bailey, because his description was brilliant, and I wish I could iterate it the way he did. But what I would say is that instead of everybody wants to be in the Bailey, the idea is we need to clear out the Bailey. And we need to focus on the Motte, No, we need to clear out the Mott and put it back in the Bailey where it belongs, and put it back into its non-defensible position. And
Yeah, I can tell that you listened to that one recently.
yeah, I listened to like Thursday or Friday. I can't remember.
I'm glad to have you on board with reading this, because I think you understand this idea, how it's important to kind of understand what's going on with this, and that it's heavy, which is why I'm trying to do these streams to dumb it down.
Well, frustratingly, it's not heavy, but they make it look like it's heavy. They are literally pressing up bullshit and calling it important, and then saying if you don't know their new words for this bullshit that is still bullshit, and you can call it bullshit, it's really fucking stupid. It's just, we want extra words to be made for no fucking reason. Yeah, Carl was listening too, and he was laughing at me because I was bitching at him the whole time. And I listen to everything on double speed, so that'll tell you a lot. I have friends I listen to, they sound like chipmunks. Like, seriously. MC is great for a great rant, and you can hear him scream and yell about stuff, and you can disagree with him or agree with him if you want. But if you listen to him on double speed when he laughs, he sounds like a chipmunk. Love the man to pieces. MC, you're awesome. You sound like a chipmunk on double speed when you giggle.
Right.
But so it's really stupid. Anti-racist is literally a racist, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, deconstruction it's not deconstruction, it's destruction.
Yeah, it like all these things, like I said, like in the liberal sense of the word, and like that's why I say let's take back liberal. I'm done with giving it to like calling everybody left liberal. I think that there's definitely intent, because once again, I want to have arguments with people that like they believe in capitalism, they believe in free speech, things like that. But maybe they have an idea that I disagree with, which is they think that we should move towards some, the example I gave is some national healthcare system, right? I want to have those arguments with real liberals, not Marxists.
Well, yeah, because Marxists aren't going to argue honestly anyway, though, because Marx never argued honestly.
Well, then you can argue with neocons, because that's what the fuck they are.
Yeah.
Yep.
He says that, actually, Irate. You should listen to James Lindsay's stuff, the new discourses. He actually says that. He does, Irate. He says that.
True.
You will like everything he did except for the one that he was talking about the era of postmodernity.
And it was okay. I just disagree with some of his. Some of this is incredibly postmodernic. Okay, it is very postmodernist because it's very nihilistic, and nihilism was created by the postmodernists. So you can't really say that it isn't. It has its heart and its root. Its roots come from postmodernity because that's where it took off from. But just like classical liberalism took off from the American Renaissance, that doesn't mean that classical liberalism is actually part of the American Renaissance.
Ask you both a question, just real quick. All right, there was a letter that came out 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 now, where it was a Berkeley professor, a man of color, talking about how this shit is killing history, and he doesn't want any fucking part of it.
Yep. No,
and it was sent to Thomas Sowell. I've got it on in my Discord. All right, so if y'all want to read it, I'll show you.
I've read it. Right. Yeah. So this is a guy that, according to the critical social justice theorist, which is why they came out and said, like, this letter does not represent the ideology of our history division. Yeah, they disavowed, is because it's not because anything he said was necessarily wrong, but it went against theory.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to anything about diversity, equity, and inclusion, they defer to critical theory.
And you can literally replace critical theory as a title with religious dogma. Like, you can literally replace these in any statement and you will come out with the same answer every time. This is nothing but religious dogma because it is rooted in zero fact.
Yeah, but I mean, the purpose behind even doing this stream is just kind of understand, like, where this stuff is coming from and how they're infecting our society. And maybe this does need to be like some sort of weekly thing we do, Themma.
Yeah,
and maybe
we go over a word.
Yeah, and maybe we isolate it. In fact, I for streams on my channel, having an average 20 viewers is fucking huge, to be totally honest.
Seriously?
2 people, yeah, on my channel? Yeah, like 20 viewers, like on average, is just ridiculous. I think at least some people watching find this interesting. I please
You're going to find it necessary soon, boys and girls. You're going to find it really necessary soon.
Yeah, please. After I end the stream, go into the comment section and just tell us do you want more information on how this is basically critical theories in the academic sense, like how this is coming to being, certain words and ideas that are coming out of it, like for instance we glossed over some things today, right? But false consciousness, critical consciousness, these things could be their topics in and of themselves.
Oh, we could do a whole stream on just consciousness, and I would totally want Irate there for that, because that is his wheelhouse.
Well, and I think we could, if we had the foresight, right, we could try to study up as best as we could beforehand to try to, once again, I'm trying to dumb this down, because you're saying, well, it's not really heavy, it's religious. Well, it's like, well, it's heavy because it's wrapped in so much
Bullshit.
Academic language that it's very, very hard to understand accurately. And if
Yeah,
you don't,
we
if you,
definitely need to have
but if,
Prospero
and if you don't understand it accurately and you try to criticize it, what they're going to do is they're going to laugh at you, and they're going to just say you just don't understand what we're really talking about,
We're past
and they're going
arguing,
to dismiss
man.
you.
But we need to know what we're dealing with so we can at least stop it at the head, right, Irate?
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
If you can make their arguments for them, which is where everybody was wrong about social justice. That's why I said you are all wrong about social justice, because you cannot make their arguments for them. I can now. Like I'm getting pretty good at it, not great. But I was talking to a Themma before the stream about how I did some Poe's law stuff, arguing from the perspective of critical social justice. And this dude, like, he went on with me for, I don't know, maybe like an hour on Twitter. And I was just passively answering it. And he said, and then like, eventually I felt bad for the guy. And I was like, dude, like, I'm being a total Poe right now. And he was like, oh, fuck. You totally pulled it off.
It was Brian levels, okay? Let's just put it there. It was Brian levels of
Well,
poetry.
let me before we leave, let me try to find that. You guys talk while I try to find the one I recited back to you guys.
Would you be interested in doing this, Excel? Yeah, you go ahead and look for it. Irate, would you be interested in hopping in every once in a while?
I'm down with that.
You down with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I can think of a couple other big brains to tap for this too, Excel. So.
Yeah. I don't know. Some days I'm like I'm about as intellectually equivalent to a fucking goldfish.
Fuck up there with you.
You know, if you're happy, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
You're the same 5 seconds of happiness all day long. It's like,
You just forgot and you found something new. Oh, look.
Look, it's awesome,
you just spent the whole
man.
day going, oh, look. Oh, look. Fuck, I'm there with you, brother. Shit, I thought it was just because I was a parent. Maybe it's just part of getting older. I don't know.
Well, you know, man, and this shit is like, it's like, I don't want to. Part of me says, what good is arguing going to do anyway? Because everybody's entrenched, man.
Yeah.
I'm not changing my mind. Because I see things the way I see them. But it does. I do need to be kept honest, I think. Because I claim to have an open mind. And so if I'm unwilling to argue or listen to another person's argument, then I'm not being open-minded at all, am I?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we need to be able to name the thing to know the thing. So, and if this is our literal enemy now is psychosis, we should probably at least try to understand the psychosis so we don't feel like we're crazy. I mean, the fact that critical theory has gained any footing just absolutely terrifies me. The idea that it's being taught as a replacement for the Socratic method in critical thinking is even.
That's terrifying.
It's wholly terrifying. So, and I think we need to name and shame it. And I really think Prospero would be somebody to grab, and Skep if he's feeling up to it, because Excel, you want people that know the history and will be able to name and give you a full-throated and a full-body description of stuff. It's Skeptalk and Prospero, because those two are so well read.
Yeah, I mean, we can bring more people in. Like I said, everybody out there that's watching the stream right now, if you enjoyed it and you want to hear more conversations specifically on this topic, it's something that's kind of been a hobby of mine lately. I think Themma, I've accidentally made it a hobby of yours.
Yeah.
Irate. Well, you also were the only person I reached out to that was very receptive of talking about this and staying on topic.
Really? Okay. Well, I'm down.
Well,
I'm down.
Because many of the people I talk to, they're kind of dismissing it, not understanding the importance of it. I think that's a problem. Like, I think people need to understand how, like, this is a real problem. This is going out of control in academia, and the floodgates are opening, right? Like, there's a direct get out of academia, no matter what you're majoring in, and go into the real world and reshape culture.
Yeah, because it's entered into STEM. I've talked to plenty of people that are taking STEM courses that are involved, that are getting inundated with this stuff now. So
I mean, that could be a whole conversation by itself of where it entered into STEM and why it's a problem.
Can you quantify your truth?
Quantify my truth.
Yeah, exactly. Quantify that truth, motherfucker.
I can quantify it, but you're not going to like it because I actually understand how quantum theory works.
Well, I'm not talking to y'all. It's just like these motherfuckers, these dumbasses. It's just, oh Jesus, y'all, they really don't get it.
Well,
and Jenny
ahead.
Durkin, she's my favorite dumbass of all right now.
Could be the summer of love.
Yeah.
Me.
Yeah.
Fuck me.
And how come? All right, so all these other states are like having a flare up of COVID, except New York. How the fuck is that happening? All right,
because they got infected like massively, and like 40% of the people already are positive for it, so they have kind of herd immunity. Anyway,
I think Mario is not giving the right numbers out.
Anyway,
because he was, the death squad for all those old people. What, he killed 5,000 people?
Something like that. Yeah,
dude, but that's socialized medicine, man. Those dudes like Mario Cuomo deciding who lives and who dies and how it happens.
I rate Themma. I love you guys, but I think we've kind of like left the topic a little bit, and I want to end the stream. Everybody, I just spammed in the chat a link to go over. Let's watch Insomnus for a while. Like, I'm actually curious to what they have to say, so I'm gonna go over there. Once again, everybody that's watching, just please post in the comments if there's very specific things about this that you want to hear about. And I think me and Themma are kind of in agreement that we can do this once a week, right? We can try to unravel this.
Totally. I'm down. Just tell me what to read.
Well, no, like let's just get the audience response in like what they want, and then we'll just look into it and see what we can do, right?
Yeah. Okay. The other thing, folks, go to Parler. Fuck Twitter. Get yourself a Parler. I'm on Parler. It's Themma the Hun. Go interact over there.
They're trying to say Parler is a failure. That's bullshit.
Oh no, it's they need to update some of their interface stuff, which once they have more money, they will. Trust me. Once they get bigger, they will. You can tell that they're already trying to fix a little bit of it, but they'll get better. And really go to somewhere where they don't give a fuck. You can be offensive. It's okay. Just don't post kitty porn and you'll be fine. And don't dox people because that will get you kicked. But, go over there. Twitter's silencing you for just posting stats and figures now. So just go over there. Go to Parler. Fuck them.
That's a problematic.
So.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and end this stream, guys. Thanks a ton for coming on. I know Themma, you just said you advertise your Parler. I rate. I mean, I don't think it goes without saying, man. The Darth Vader of YouTube. Subscribe to Irate Prostate. Man, the cream streams. Love it. Wish I didn't fall asleep before them most of the time, but
We
yeah.
had one last night. We
didn't have one yet.
I came up with this idea, and I was like putting all these videos together. I'm putting together like most of the stuff that didn't make it, that nobody's seen from the riots.
Good.
And I've got like each by state, and then I've got I'm going to disperse in between questions of people of like what they're doing and their incredible answers.
Which is going to back up the fact that this is really being taught this way. Okay, This is going to be fun.
All right, man. I'm going to end the stream right now once again. Just post in the comments section if you want us to explore a specific topic on critical social justice theories with our dumb analysis, because we aren't academics that are studying this hardcore. Because there's only like 5 of them in the country that are doing that anyway. So,
how dare we?
Yeah, post that in the comments, and I am more than happy to do another stream next week, at least once a week, talking about these kind of things. Thanks everybody for coming out. I was very surprised to see so many of you actually stick around and listen to us. Love you all. And until next time, man, peace out.